Friedman, as all of you must know, he was the U.S. ambassador to Israel under President Trump. He was the first ambassador appointed and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. He was a powerhouse in everything that he did and how he did it. I'm grateful that we've become friends over the years. I've seen him, I've admired everything he's done as a wonderful family. Published an amazing book called Sledgehammer. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's about his story, his backstory, and how he became ambassador and his time as ambassador. And with so much going on in Israel and Gaza and the region, I am so excited to have Ambassador David Friedman with us on the podcast. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you, Gabe. It's great to be with you, even late. Better late than never.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. There's a lot of challenges when we talk about U.S. politics and the way U.S. political discourse unfolds vis-a-vis Israel. On the left, obviously, we have the crazies. On the far left, there are the Hamas caucus, what we now call the Hamas caucus, is an ever-growing group of members of Congress that are more and more active against the state of Israel, but also the mainstream Democrat Party. But let's first start with our own party, with the Republican Party. Sometimes we're hearing this discourse. Luckily, it's not really making its way into the halls of Congress at this point, but we're hearing discourse about what does the U.S. really need to care about what's happening in Israel? Why are we spending time and money in Israel? So I really just want to start with a question to you as to why a strong Israel and a stable Middle East is so important for U.S. security here in the U.S.
Well, look, in the 4 years that I worked in government and had access to the kind of information that's not available publicly, I was able to see how the efforts, the partnership between America and Israel, literally keeps Americans safe at home. I mean, I can't talk about it in great detail, but I can tell you that there were attacks on American soil that would not have been prevented were it not for the relationship between Israel and America, the military, the intel, all the cooperation. Israel is an incredible ally in this sense, and I don't know that any other country could be characterized this way. The Israeli military and intelligence echelon views any threat to an American as seriously as it views a threat to an Israeli, and they act with extraordinary vigor in trying to protect their allies, especially the American people. And look, when it comes to the Republican, shying away from foreign aid, it's a symptom. It's not a symptom of hostility to Israel. It's a symptom of a broken country that where people are facing two events at the same time. One is a diminishing economy, and the other is a transfer of resources to illegal aliens, to people who are just pouring through the border and taking with them a huge amount of American resources to house them and to feed them and to provide them with medical care. And so people are saying, and understandably so, I mean, we need to understand the movement. They're saying, understandably, look, if we're not going to protect our own borders, why are we spending so much money protecting other countries' borders, right? Which is essentially what it is, whether it's Ukraine or Israel. In both cases, the borders were compromised by evil actors. And so people are saying, look, I think we need to understand them. They're saying, look, you got to protect America first before you can go out and protect others. Charity, begins at home. I understand the movement. It's not, at least in the case of Israel, it's certainly not in America's best interest. I don't think it's in America's best interest as to Ukraine either. We should be funding both these nations in their time of need, but we need to understand the movement and not confuse it with anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism. Although, I mean, that does weave its way in among the worst of our fellow Republicans. But generally speaking, it's an understandable reaction to a broken country, and I think we need to be honest about it.
That's absolutely fair. What baffles my mind, and you would have been in the center of this if you had been ambassador during this term, during this war, is that today there are 9 Americans, as you well know, that are being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. Americans. And we all think as Americans, I was born in this country, I was born in Washington, D.C., and it's the best passport in the world to have. Anything happens to you, the U.S. government is going to go out and get you. They're going to protect you wherever you are. Yet, for some reason, we don't hear anything from President Biden. We don't hear anything from the new ambassador, Jack Lew. We don't hear anything from anyone really in the U.S. administration about the U.S. hostages, the American hostages that are being held in Gaza by Hamas. Quite the contrary, we continue to sort of fund Gaza. We just, the Senate just approved $9 billion, I think, to go towards the reconstruction of Gaza, with not one word about the American hostages. How does that strike you, as someone who was in that position as ambassador to Israel from the U.S., of how the U.S. really should be handling it and why they're not?
Well, it's just reflective of the weakness of the Biden administration generally. Look, hostage negotiations are complicated and difficult, but we had 4 Americans in North Korea. Mike Pompeo flew to North Korea. He met with Chairman Kim, and he said to him, "Look, when the president and I are of the view that when I leave North Korea, I'm going to have 4 more people on the plane that I came here with, 4 more Americans," and we got them out. And it was a question of, staring down these people, looking them in the eye and saying, "Look, we're serious about this." Obviously, it's 9 Americans. It's more than 100 Israelis. Every precious life should be sacred to us. And, I'm not seeing America with the $900 billion a year military budget and all that comes with it, with the resources of America and the strength of America and the power of America. I'm really not seeing American power being asserted. I'm not talking about, starting a war, but I'm not seeing America's power, which is vast, and it extends to the economy, it extends to, to trade, it extends to all different facets of life. We are not exporting that power anywhere in the world to keep the world safe. We're not doing it in Russia. We're not doing it in China. We're not doing it with Iran. We're not doing it with Hamas. And in fact, we're engaging in these protracted negotiations that frankly are not moving at a pace that you would expect given America's leverage.
Yeah, we're not using the leverage that we have as a country at all, which is really upsetting to see. It's upsetting to see how we're not doing that here in the United States with our own issues, and we're not doing it abroad. But focusing again in the Middle East, if we're trying to understand maybe the why as to why this war really started, would love to get your opinion on how you think the pending or the growing possibility of a deal between Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia played in Hamas's decision, or Iran's decision with Hamas to attack Israel on October 7th.
So some people are saying that they're saying that this was the response to potentially progress with Saudi Arabia. That's not my view. My view is that Hamas would have done this on any day at any time where they thought they would be successful. The Hamas mandate is to infiltrate Israel and to kill Jewish people, and they would do that, I believe, at any point where they had the opportunity. Unfortunately, Israel gave them that opportunity. I think this was a colossal failure of Israeli intelligence, of military, of political, of the political echelons, a perfect storm, if you will, of failures. When President Trump was talking about building a wall, he asked me to speak to the Israelis because the wall. The barrier between Gaza and Israel hadn't been breached, in 50 years. And so he wanted to know what was the secret ingredient to make that wall so impervious. And so I spoke to a dear friend of mine who was the head of the Southern Command for a good number of years, and he had 100% success rate and never having had an infiltration. And I said to him, what's the wall made out of? What's like so special about this wall? And he said, it's not the wall. The wall could be made out of paper. We don't let people get close to the wall. Nobody gets within a couple of kilometers of our border. Once they get within 2 kilometers, they're too close already. And that was, I remember being asked, when I was ambassador during the time when things flared up, why is Israel using live ammunition on these people rather than water cannons? And, I looked into it and they said, well, the problem with the water cannon, apart from it being one of the driest places in the world, the problem with the water cannon is that it only has a range of about 100 to 200 feet. Now, within that range, once people get that close, they can throw a hand grenade, they can shoot an RPG, they can run a truck through the barrier. So the whole idea is not to let them get close. And here, what we learned about this particular, invasion was that for months the Hamas terrorists were training right alongside the wall, and they were being called out for it, and their superiors were not responding. So this was, this is not, Hamas making a political statement. They're not saying, hey, pay attention to us. We're important too. Don't just chase Saudi Arabia. This is not a repudiation of the Abraham Accords. What this is a failure on the part of Israel. And ultimately, they'll run through that forensic analysis and decide where to place the blame, and more importantly, how to make sure it never happens again. But this to me was a failure by Israel, which Hamas took advantage of, and they would have taken advantage of it at any point over the last 20 years, or 15 years, had the opportunity presented itself. That's my perspective.
Yeah, and when you look at why this really happened, I think what you're pointing out is the tolerance level that Israel decided to have for breaching that area before the border and allowing them to be there, but also allowing Hamas to continue to make plans to attack Israel. There's reports coming out where Hamas had a lot of plans to attack Israel. We didn't know this is the one they were going to use. And I think when something like this happens, it's important for all world actors, not just Israel, not just the country involved directly, to learn lessons from that. And I think from my perspective, what always jumps out at me is the problem that we in the United States and the problem that in Israel they have as well, which is the tolerance level is too high. The tolerance level for terrorism, for foreign actors shooting rockets, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Palestinian Authority or Islamic Jihad in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, like some people call it. And here in the United States, it's the same thing with the border. So these are issues that we allow to fester as Western societies because we don't always want to go to war over everything. But the thing is, once you, and I mean that literally and also proverbially, but once you allow things to fester and to grow, all that can happen is that someone can light a match and it can all explode. And I think that's really what happened.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the one thing which Israel's going to have to really understand better is just how failed the strategy was to enable Hamas to be in power. But the idea was we'll keep them in power, but we'll keep them weak. Right? That was essentially the strategy. You can debate whether or not keeping them in power was a good idea or a bad idea, and there were political reasons to do so, and I don't happen to agree with them. But that's more of a political policy debate. But the idea of keeping them weak was an abject failure because they weren't weak, right? I mean, they had massive amounts of money. I think just a couple of days ago they uncovered hundreds of millions of shekels in currency in Khan Yunis. I mean, they had massive amounts of money. And they built, 350 miles of terror tunnels in this tiny area. I mean, it was a complete spiderweb of tunnels throughout the entirety of Gaza, with, sophisticated communication systems and ventilation and the ability to drive trucks in at a certain point. So to a certain extent, Israel permitted Hamas not just to become strong as opposed to weak, but to have what I consider to be the greatest home court advantage anywhere in the world with regard to, armed combat. I mean, it's harder to invade Gaza and have a good outcome than anywhere else in the world. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the Americans were predicting, they came to Israel and tried to talk them out of invading, of going into Gaza, and they said, you're going to have more than 20 Israeli soldiers dying every day, right? Which at this point would have been something like 2,800 soldiers, God forbid, killed. Israel, fortunately, did not take that advice. Their casualties are roughly 10% of what America predicted. Still way too high, but 10%. And Israel's on the verge of winning the war. They've gone from 24 Hamas battalions down to about 4, mostly now kind of settled around Rafah. And they have the capacity to actually win this war, which most of the world said was unwinnable. But they have to be given the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to what's happening right now at the United Nations Security Council with the United States proposing a resolution the call for a ceasefire, and yes, it says at the right time or some sort of language like that, but also urging Israel not to invade or not to go into Rafah. What's interesting, like the day that Biden got on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu, with Bibi, and told him not to go into Rafah, that was the Super Bowl Sunday. That evening, Israel did go in and took out 2 hostages alive.
Yeah.
The pressure that we're seeing now from the U.S., I mean, the U.S. has been incredible in the beginning of this war. Biden was good in the beginning of the war, moved over ships, but now that it's like the price, the way I feel is the price for all of that support is now being shown, and the pressure on the international stage is a lot. Do you think Israel is going to be able to withstand that? They're going to ignore the UN, the United States, and just keep pushing to finish the war? Do you see that they have any other choice?
Well, I think they have no choice but to finish the war. I think the popular will to finish the war is enormous. I think the will to maintain pressure to release the hostages is enormous. It may be the only way to release them, or at least release as many as possible, is through additional military action. I think they are. I think they have, Sinwar on the run. He seems to have lost his ability to command and control the terrorists. This is exactly the wrong time to slow down. I mean, and I don't think the Israeli military would support that, or the prime minister would support that. I don't know why they're going to the UN. To be honest with you, I mean, I've been commenting on this lately. Between the Secretary General, who has been as callous and unhelpful as anybody could be in that role, to a Security Council, with Russia, China, and Algeria, kind of running the show. Algeria is the one that proposed this resolution that was just vetoed a couple of hours ago by the United States, fortunately, to UNRWA, which literally has Jewish blood on its hands in terms of actively assisting the Hamas terrorists. I don't think the U.S. should be pushing a Security Council resolution, because I think it dignifies the UN much more than it deserves. This resolution that they're now pushing, which on the one hand, says have a ceasefire, I think as soon as practical, is kind of a meaningless resolution. I mean, Israel's not going to continue to fight beyond what's practical. I mean, what does it suggest that Israel they're going to win, and then they're going to keep fighting just for the sport of it? So I don't understand the resolution. I don't understand what it's trying to do, and I hate the idea that they were somehow going to, kind of start wordsmithing what is really just a military battle. I mean, Israel just has to win this war, and then we can talk about the next steps.
Yeah, it looks like I lost my video camera, but the audio is still working. So let's just keep going. What's interesting is it's pretty consistent with the U.S. position on everything else, right? Because all we had to do was veto the Algerian resolution and leave it at that. But instead, it's like we don't have even the diplomatic strength to veto it and move on. We have to veto it and counter-propose some of sort of in-between resolution at the Security Council. So even amongst the worst actors in the world, we're still tiptoeing around American strength.
Yeah, and look, it's frankly, I mean, I think most of this boils down to the election and the voters in Michigan. I mean, it's got a huge Arab population. Dearborn, Michigan is kind of ground zero for anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist rhetoric. A State Department senior official, a guy named John Feiner, went to Dearborn and gave a speech and basically apologized on behalf of President Biden for all the pro-Israel efforts that they've made, and said it was a mistake. So, because it's an election year, and because Biden is his support among the progressives is softening because of this, he's trying to thread a needle. Where on the one hand, he's being supportive of Israel because because the Democratic Party has a shrinking but still significant pro-Israel component, and he's trying to placate the anti-Israel component of the Democratic Party, which unfortunately is growing. He's trying to thread this needle, and ultimately all he's doing is giving mixed signals, which are making nobody happy.
Yeah, he's not going to gain one vote from this play, and it's pretty sad and pathetic for a president to play with people's lives and with a real situation, an existential war on the state of Israel, just to try to win electoral votes in certain places and to try to appease a certain part of his party. Even if it were to work, it was problematic. And on top of it, I don't think it is going to work for him. But let me ask you a question. You were ambassador under President Trump. If President Trump were president today, how different would the U.S.'s position in Israel be during this war?
Well, I think the first point, if he were president, you would have a very different relationship with Iran, right? Which I think is sort of the root cause of a lot of this. So when we left office, Iran was broke and Qasem Soleimani was dead. The only thing Biden hasn't changed is the fact that Qasem Soleimani is still dead. Like, that's the only thing he hasn't been able to reverse. But as far as the sanctions against Iran, they haven't been enforced. I mean, they're on the books, but he's not enforcing them. And Iran has become a very wealthy nation, selling billions of dollars of oil to our two greatest enemies, Russia and China. And that alone, that fact alone, has totally upended geopolitics almost everywhere in the world. With regard to the specifics of Hamas and Hezbollah, look, obviously they get their money from Iran. So if Iran would have remained broke, that money would have not been there, and that might have probably would have arrested any of this assault. The second thing I think Trump would do under these circumstances, I'm pretty sure of it, because we went through this before when I was in office, and we did have Hamas attacks that were not on this scale, but they were meaningful. No handcuffs on Israel. I mean, that's really kind of the bottom line. I think what the signal the United States would have given to Israel from President Trump would be, do what you need to do to win this war as quickly and decisively as you can. We recognize the fact that you're fighting against a barbaric foe that not only targets civilians, but hides behind civilians as well. So it commits a double war crime every time it shoots a rocket. And just, defend yourself as you see fit. We trust you. We trust you not to go overboard, if there's such a thing. And we're going to support you in this battle because we know what you're going through, and we would do the same thing. That's what I think you'd get out of President Trump. Far less equivocation, far less confusion, and I think that would have ended this battle much more quickly if it even would have started in the first place.
So we're both American Jews, and anti-Semitism has exploded since October 7th. It had been exploding for about 10 years, year over year, doubling almost every single year. We've both been very active on that issue for so many years. But of course, since October 7th, it's really reached another level. All the masks that people on the left had in the university systems in so many different places where they were pretending to be anti-Israel or anti-Zionism, but really it's been ripped right off, and the anti-Semitism is out in the open. As a Jewish community, we're dealing with it as best we can. What's your reaction to the explosion of anti-Semitism since October 7th, the support that lasted maybe only a few hours for the Jewish community around the world, and what we should do about it moving forward?
Well, look, it's the natural outgrowth of decades of investments by Israel's enemies in American universities, in American think tanks. It's impossible to get tenure at an elite American university if you're a Zionist, if you're an overt Zionist. You just can't advance. It's the society in which we live, in which TikTok has kind of overtaken legitimate news in putting out narratives of Israel that are false, defamatory, and obviously very unflattering. And it's the failure of the adults in the room, if you will. It's the failure of college presidents and college faculty to put an end to this. In any other minority would have gotten up and said, we're being triggered, we don't feel safe, and immediately universities would have taken action. But Jewish kids on campus who are trying to study for an organic chemistry final, which needs a little bit of concentration. They can't focus because outside their window people are screaming, Palestine from the river to the sea, and globalize the Intifada, which is essentially a threat of a physical assault on them personally. So it's a failure of law enforcement as well. I mean, we take people who commit these acts. We rarely even arrest them. When they're arrested, they're released within a half an hour. Nobody even has to post bail. So some of the worst, hate crimes of our generation are finding that there are no consequences to what they're doing. So it's really a perfect storm of failure of social media, academia, and law enforcement that has allowed this to develop and to grow and to flourish. And it could be fixed just as quickly, if we had different leaders. Ultimately, it's a failure of the American political leadership, especially over the last 3 years. When President Trump was in office, he signed an executive order extending Title VI to religious discrimination, which hadn't really dealt with anti-Semitism before. And he adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which extended that definition to anti-Zionism. And he created a platform for the United States to really deprive anti-Semitic universities of their government funding. That's still on the books, but Biden won't enforce it. And he won't adopt the IHRA definition, as you know, when he put out his big anti-Semitism report, which did nothing to address anti-Zionism on college campuses. This was way before October 7th. Some of us pointed out, you're burying the lead here. I mean, the most important thing that you need to deal with in this country, you're not even addressing in your much heralded anti-Semitism report. So, these are failures that are correctable, but they won't be correctable without a change in our leadership, both at the federal level and at the local levels.
Yeah, and in addition, a failure, I think, also with civil leadership. Just the same tone issue that I see that Israel had is tolerance, and same issue we're having with the border, tolerance. Our tolerance level is too high. Those of us involved in different civil groups, whether it's at universities or nonprofits or at work, and of course in politics, local elected officials, mayors, governors are more important than ever. And we shouldn't have tolerance for this kind of nonsense in our society. Of course, respecting everyone's First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, all the constitutional rights that we all have. We're both attorneys, we both respect all of that greatly, but we also can help build the kind of societies that we want to live in and we want to thrive in. With regards to the Jewish community, I think despite what people believe, we're not all that engaged in politics as a whole or in leadership in that sense, and I think we need to be far more in that sense. But anyways, we keep having technical issues here with the camera. We started late from some issues, and I want to be respectful of your time. And with that, I just want to thank you so much for joining the podcast, Ambassador David Friedman. We'll do it again in person, so we won't have any of these issues. I am excited for what's next for you when we see President Trump back in the White House, hopefully in January of next year. I hope we see you there by his side in some capacity or the other. All of us, Americans, American Jews, all of us together, we're so lucky to have had you serve as ambassador and your voice be really a national voice on this issue. So thank you so much. Everybody, please like, subscribe, follow, do all those great things you do to help support podcasts. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, Gabe. God bless you. Be well.